Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on Unit 6, really mapping out that escalating tension that leads, directly to the Civil War.
hmm
We've got a whole stack of sources here, and our mission is to connect the dots between the key figures, the moral arguments, and the political decisions that just made compromise impossible.
Right, and it's so important to frame this period, the 1830s through the 1860s, as this huge crisis of identity.
A crisis? How so?
Well, you have this collision between the intense moral energy from the Second Great Awakening and the very aggressive political reality of manifest destiny.
So religion versus expansion.
In a way, yeah. The second the U.S. grabbed all that new territory out west, the debate over slavery, it just wasn't theoretical anymore. It became, physically unavoidable.
That's a perfect lens. So let's start with those voices of conviction. The abolitionist movement wasn't monolithic, was it?
Not at all. You start at the most extreme end with someone like David Walker. His appeal to the colored citizens of the world in 1829 was, frankly, terrifying to people at the time.
Because he wasn't asking for change, he was demanding it.
He was calling for an armed uprising,
Ooh.
for black people to kill all white people to end slavery. He argued that even free African Americans had the lowest form of freedom, so violence wasn't a last resort, it was the only resort.
And that's a world away from, say, William Lloyd Garrison and his newspaper, The Liberator.
Right. Garrison was all about moral suasion. He was nonviolent,
Right.
but, and this is key, he refused to be moderate.
I remember that famous quote.
I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice.
And I will be heard. It's so powerful.
It is. And what's fascinating is that his harshest criticism was often for the North. He saw Northern apathy, their willingness to just look away, as even worse than Southern slave ownership. That really put the pressure on.
And then you have the voice of someone who actually lived it. Frederick Douglass.
Douglass is just stunning. His 1852 4th of July speech, he just turns the whole idea of American liberty on its head. He calls it a sham, a hollow mockery.
He used their own celebration against them.
And with facts. He'd cite Virginia law, where a black man could be executed for 72 different crimes, but a white man for only 2 of the same ones. He wasn't just appealing to emotion, he was exposing a deeply unjust legal system.
So if these guys are the rhetorical vanguard, who's providing the spiritual fuel?
That's where figures from the Second Great Awakening come in. Charles Grandison Finney is central.
Right.
Finney basically said that God was forcing the issue of slavery to a decision and that churches had to take a stand. If you stayed silent on a great national sin, you were, in his words, consenting to it.
Which forced a lot of hands.
It forced every church in the North to choose a side.
And that push into the public sphere also created this huge conflict over the role of women, which we see with Catherine Beecher and Angelina Grimke.
Oh, this is a perfect point of contrast. Beecher is the traditionalist. She argued women belong in a subordinate station, using their influence, peace, and love behind the scenes. Don't go out and yell like a man, as she put it.
Use soft power, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Angelina Grimke, she just completely rejected that. Her argument was simple and radical.
Yeah.
Whatever is morally right for a man to do, it is morally right for a woman to do.
And she lived it.
She did. She gave lectures to mixed-sex audiences. They were called promiscuous assemblies, which was scandalous. She tied abolition directly to women's rights, which made the whole movement even more controversial.
Okay, so as the North is ramping up this moral attack, the South has to build a defense. And it can't just be about economics.
Right. They had to justify it morally and religiously. So they leaned on 2 big ideas: biblical authority and paternalism.
You see that in publications like Debo's Review.
Absolutely. They'd go to the Old Testament, point to Abraham and say, see, slaveholding is sanctioned by God.
Yeah.
It gave a simple, powerful justification to every slave owner.
And then you have someone like Bishop Stephen Elliott of Georgia, who pushes the idea of paternalism.
He preached that slavery was providential, part of God's plan. The argument was that it was actually good for the enslaved because it brought them to Christianity and taught them obedience. The slaveholder becomes this protective father figure.
Not an oppressor.
Exactly. So in that view, the abolitionists were interfering with God's work.
Which brings us to how culture itself became a battlefield. I mean, you can't talk about this period without talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin.
You really can't.
Yeah.
It was the best-selling novel of the century. And Harriet Beecher Stowe's genius was that she made the abstract horrors of slavery personal. She focused on the family.
The separation of mothers and children.
That and the way it corrupted white society, like with the character of Simon Legree. For Northern readers, it turned slavery from a political issue into a human tragedy.
It's why Lincoln supposedly said to her, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war."
And of course, the South had to respond to that.
Immediately, you get these pro-slavery novels like Caroline Hence's The Planter's Northern Bride.
I've heard of that one.
It's a direct counter-narrative. A northern woman moves south and learns that the slaveholder isn't cruel at all. He's that kind, paternalistic figure who is loved by his people. It was a piece of literary propaganda, really.
So before we get to the politics, there's one more piece. The violence was already there, under the surface. It was foreshadowed by Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831.
Yes, Turner believed he was getting signs from God commanding him to fight the serpent. He and his followers killed dozens of white people.
And that absolutely terrified the South.
It confirmed their deepest fear, organized internal revolt. After his confession was published, it led to much harsher slave codes and locked the South into this rigid defensive crouch. Any northern criticism after that was seen as an existential threat.
So the moral stage is set, the lines are drawn. Now let's talk about the politicians who poured gasoline on that fire. Where does the political acceleration really begin?
It begins with James K. Polk, the expansionist president. He delivered on his promise to annex Texas and win the Mexican-American War.
And in doing so, he brings in the huge Mexican Cession, California, New Mexico.
All of it. And that success is the paradox. It's the thing that guarantees the conflict, because now you have to answer the question for all this new land, slave or free.
And David Wilmot jumps in immediately with an answer.
He does. The Wilmot Proviso. He proposed banning slavery in all the new territory. It never passed, but it became the core idea of the new Free Soil Party.
And it's so important for our listeners to get this distinction. Free Soilers were not abolitionists.
No, absolutely not. Their main goal was protecting the West for free white labor. They didn't want to compete with wealthy slaveholders and enslaved labor.
So it was an economic argument, not a moral one.
Primarily, yes. But the South didn't see the difference. To them, it was an attack on their property rights and their future. It proved the North wanted to strangle them.
Okay, so after a brief pause with the Compromise of 1850, we get the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, and Stephen Douglas.
Douglas is the key accelerant here. He wants a transcontinental railroad to start in Chicago, and to get Southern support, he makes a deal.
He repeals the Missouri Compromise line.
He rips up a 30-year-old agreement that had kept the peace. And in its place, he puts in popular sovereignty. Let the settlers in Kansas and Nebraska vote on it themselves.
Which just sounds so democratic.
It sounds great on paper, but it shattered the idea of a fixed border between slave and free. It meant slavery could now potentially go anywhere. To the North, it was an unbelievable betrayal.
And the result was bleeding Kansas.
Instantaneously. It was a complete disaster. Pro-slavery border ruffians from Missouri and anti-slavery settlers funded by northern groups flooded into Kansas to stuff ballot boxes and eventually kill each other. It proved popular sovereignty was a path to civil war, not compromise.
This radicalism wasn't just on the ground, it was political. In the South, you get the fire eaters.
The fire eaters were the Southern extremists who saw everything the North did as a threat and just said, that's it, we have to leave.
They wanted secession.
Immediately. And their real impact was splitting the Democratic Party in the 1860 election. By refusing to compromise, they guaranteed that the Republican candidate would win.
And speaking of radicals, let's talk about John Brown. He takes the violence of Kansas and makes it a national crisis.
He does. The 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry was something else entirely. He wasn't just fighting settlers, he was attacking a federal arsenal to try and start a massive slave rebellion.
Failed, obviously.
It failed, and he was executed. But the psychological impact was enormous. The South saw him as a terrorist. Proof that the North was funding insurrections to murder them in their beds.
But in the North,
For many abolitionists in the North, he became a martyr, a hero who died for a righteous cause. And when one side sees a terrorist and the other sees a martyr, there's no common ground left.
and that leads right to the final straw, Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860.
Exactly. The Republican Party was created on that free soil principle. Stop the expansion of slavery. Not abolish it everywhere, but contain it.
But Lincoln won without a single Southern state.
Not one. And for the South, that was the end game. It meant the North, with its growing population, would now control the federal government forever. They saw a future where their way of life, their entire investment in human property, was under permanent threat from a hostile government.
So secession was their only move left.
In their minds, it was the only way to preserve their society.
So if you trace it all back, you have this intense moral conviction from Walker to Garrison to Stowe. colliding with this relentless political expansion from Polk and Douglas.
And every attempt at a political solution like popular sovereignty just made things worse. The extremism of John Brown and the Fire Eaters just slammed the door on any kind of moderate path. The House divided became completely ungovernable.
It's clear that these figures and events didn't just debate slavery. They broke every mechanism holding the country together, making the war inevitable.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to think about. The great irony of all this is in the solution itself. The Emancipation Proclamation, the thing that destroyed slavery, was only legally possible because the South seceded and started a war.
What do you mean?
Secession gave Lincoln war powers he never would have had otherwise. He didn't believe he had the constitutional authority to end slavery in states that were loyal to the Union. If the South had stayed, slavery might have lasted for decades longer. By trying to protect their institution with disunion, they guaranteed its destruction.